Welcome to another segment of Can We Have a Conversation? We are having a returning guest that is with us. Our conversation went so well that we asked him to come back again, and his name is Dr. Michael Connor.
Thank you, sir.
Professor.
Thank you.
Dr. Michael Connor. And for those that did not see the first show, he is an educator, he's an author, he is a child psychologist and a professor, and a retired emeritus professor. He is an expert in the fatherhood spectrum. He's been working on this way before they were giving attention to fatherhood, and became I feel a good friend, and I think our conversations can go on forever. And so I would like to just talk about some issues that we weren't able to address in the last conversation. And that is fathers being more engaged with their sons, and the non-traditional system as far as custody for non-resident fathers, and the twist on fatherhood and motherhood, and how there are some mothers that have been bitter or has resentment towards a father, and because of that has caused the children to suffer. And so it doesn't have to be in that order, but I think we're going to start this conversation just basically talking about your experience with African American fathers, and maybe we can start off with the myth about African American fathers, and that all African American fathers are deadbeat dads, and that statistics may say one thing, just kind of like your book, the invisible presence of a father in America, a black father in America. What is your experience on that?
Let me first begin with to add two more things. That with the other things I'm doing is that I'm also a father and I'm a grandfather. I want to make sure I get that in as well. And the work that I've been doing with men over the years has touched with a bunch of men. One of the things in the psychological literature, black men are noted as being absent. And any research you look at, you'll talk about the deficits. In fact, in psychology, we had what was called the cultural deficit hypothesis. So essentially anything about us kind of tied in with deficiencies. The fact of the matter is, though, we tend to find that African American fathers spend a lot more time with their children than other populations. They get no credit for that. They're much more involved, engaged, and willing to learn than other men have been. It raises a bigger question in the society. Is this kind of an individual problem, or is it kind of systemic and ties in with any number of things? Because that's the negative aspects that you carry every day have impact on you. We tended to find, and there's plenty of research that support this, that again, African American men are willing and able to spend extra time with their kids, extra time for men, beyond work, beyond other responsibilities, are very interested in one-on-one time with their children, are interested in sharing time with their kids, more so than other populations. But again, the key here is they get no credit for that. So you read the literature, you primarily see deficits. Additionally, one of the things that we notice is that when you go to court, the court system tends to be skewed against black men as well. And so the folks who are in court tend not to know the populations that they are supposedly assessing, helping to make decisions about, et cetera. And that becomes a big problem because if divorce remains fairly rampant in the United States. If you got kids, the focus needs to shift. The focus needs to shift on which parent is going to be the most cooperative with the family. I argue that's the parent who should get custody, not mom, not dad. The parent is willing to be the most willing to compromise, to give up, to make amends, make the exceptions in their lives that they could be more available. Unfortunately, the court doesn't look like that. So other games get played out in court, and it's really a sad situation. I'm thinking about a situation I worked in many years ago. In my middle career, I did a lot of court work, divorce mediation, child custody issues, etc. And as I indicated, I was always looking for the parent who was willing on their own to be the most cooperative, that I could see myself arguing for them, because both the parents and the kids would have more of a chance doing that. The court didn't look at that. They saw that entirely different, and how they went about the assessment was always baffling to me. They didn't use tools that were standardized in the African American community. They had stereotypes about black men that ended up being spoken of in the court, and they missed some golden opportunities to keep the families much more together. When he is divorcing, they are divorcing, the kids are not to be divorced. The idea is that the kids should still be with mom and dad, and we try to work out ways where the kids could maximize their existence and the time with mom and dad, which means that the parents would have to be cooperative. What we find, though, is that the mothers ended up often, after he got re-involved with another woman, would withhold visitation, wouldn't be available on a Saturday morning, or kids wouldn't be available when the time had come that he could not see his kids. And that really does significant harm to the children. They still want to be with mom and dad. They may be frustrated with mom and dad, but the normal thing for them is mom and dad are still together. They then confront this very formal, very powerful system that makes decisions for them, and their needs are often not factored in, and it needs to happen. So we need to have conversations about that, and as couples are getting apart, they really should go see somebody and talk about how to work it out, not to punish the other parent, but rather how do we work out the situation that the kids have access to mama and dad.
That's a great introduction to go into this conversation. And the reason why I say that is, okay, that sometimes is easier said than done.
Most of the time.
Right.
Yes.
And I say that is because what if one of the parties are willing to do that, but the other one does not want to participate? And
that's my point. In terms of the parent who's willing to be cooperative is who gets the children. Now, I'm not saying that's what happens. I argue that's what should happen. If I really want my kids, then I didn't need to be the most cooperative. Well, then all of a sudden these things are easy to work out. There's nothing to fight about. That I want to be fair, I expect you to be fair. I'd like to say goodnight to my kids. I'd like to put them in bed. I'd like to be there when they wake up in the morning at least a couple of times a week. How do we make that happen? Can I shift my schedule at work? Can you shift your schedule at work? But yeah, we can take those into consideration. And I think you're absolutely right. I think the system is set up that assures that parents will fight. And other than probably putting money in the attorney's pockets, I can think of nothing positive that happens in those scenarios.
Well, it's really difficult for those fathers that, for one, may not have the sufficient funds to hire an attorney.
Yes.
And it appears that the court frowns at those that do not have representation.
Yes.
And because they don't have representation, it seems like they're penalized because they don't have representation.
I think there's any number of situations where that's exactly true in terms of what happens. Black males in America, there's a lot of problems with the court system. Some of the younger men I worked with who are not about parenting, but are really don't see any choice but to cop a plea. And that does not work out. Any of us who really want to be honest about the situation, that really does not work out. You're held in custody because they don't have a trial. But if you cop a plea, whether you're innocent or guilty doesn't matter. You're guilty, and then you lose rights later on. You lose opportunity later on, etc. So it creates a vicious spiral that this youngster falls into, having no idea what the impact of not being able to get certain jobs jobs, to get funds for school, to vote, no longer exists, depending on what the crime has been that he's being accused of. But it certainly has a huge impact on his parenting role there, because if I can't get certain jobs, then that limits what I can do. And what we know that you can do, although it's a huge problem, is sell drugs in the street, and that's exactly what has happened. And then to blame the kid, he's got to eat, got to have a place to stay, etc. And all of a sudden, what the system is set up is his problem. And I think we're just very, very blatantly dishonest about that. We need to have a conversation about what that's about, and then do a lot of shifting. So, and it's all things being equal, both mom and dad are working. We see that one of the parents is being really negative. Any court mediator can see that. We let her or him know that's not acceptable, and let's refer them to get some help, get some counseling, get some other type of help that's needed, to be certain the plan here is to do what is best for the child. And you're not going to treat one parent negative and the other one positive. Everybody gets treated the same. I do believe that's possible. I don't think it's really desirable for a lot of people in the system.
I've known on various occasions where when it comes to the children being the best interest is often not the case in the court system. They may say that, but when it really comes down to it, that is not something that really they enforce.
I agree with that, yeah.
Which is really unfortunate, because kids didn't ask to come here.
Correct.
And because kids are oftentimes caught in the middle of controversy and chaos and confusion, that it should be what's best for the children.
Yes.
And society doesn't seem as though it's best for society that a man should have custody of his children.
Well, keep in mind, my profession was a big part of this problem, because psychologists came up with the idea that women were the purview of children. Men were going to go out and toil in the fields and work, etc. And they came up, and if I'm going to be honest, it's white males that came up with these ideas. They didn't ask for input from other people, and other people were not in those positions. But we assumed that to be accurate and correct. Nobody's apologized for that error yet. And it clearly was an error, because we've taken that misinformation to an extreme, that we will, the so-called tender years doctrine means that women should have custody over the children during the tender years, i.e. during their infancy, their preschool, the very young years. And in fact, the data is pretty clear again. There's nothing that fathers cannot do with their infants other than nurse and give birth. They can learn to do everything else. They can be nurturing, they can hold, change diapers, prepare food, express their love, their caring of their child, etc. They could be taught to do that stuff. And quite frankly, women must be taught that also. This is not a natural thing that comes in. But if you have an opportunity and you have a program in place, my experience has been men are very accepting of it, as are women. The plan is, let's do what is best for our child. It's only when the difficulties come up between the two of us, the two adults, that gets thrown out, and it shouldn't. Once you decide, and if you're having unprotected sex, you made a decision. Once we decide to have a child, the game is different now. You have to make the shift. It's called being an adult, being responsible. You make the shift, and that's where you are the remainder of your days, because you don't outgrow the need to parent. You parent differently when your kids are older, but you're not done parenting. Right. That's with you for the rest of the days.
Right. I want to talk about when we talk about parenting, and we talk about the father. I think one of the skills, even if they're not married, is to be able to actively listen.
Yes.
And what we do in Man to Man is we teach these fathers how to actively listen, how to actively communicate, and how to deal with conflict resolution.
Yes.
You want to talk about that?
Oh yeah, it's critical. The program that you're talking about, the Man to Man, is really critical because if we're not paying attention and we don't have the opportunity, we're not learning how to develop skills within relationships, be it in marriage, out of marriage. Once I make a child, I have some responsibilities that are there from now on. I need to learn how to interact with those, act on them, share information, be consistent. And consistency becomes really critical. Your child needs consistency from the beginning. Eat at the same time, sleep at the same times, be up and active at the same times, etc. Because there's a rhythm in life that we need to attend to. And we need to do it for ourselves also, because basically we all need to be in sync with how nature is responding. But if we don't have that information, if somebody has not shared that with us, or I do not get a chance to observe it, where do I get it? And I think in many ways it gets minimized. I'm always amazed with folks, youngsters, who believe they're full-grown men, whatever that means, right? Whatever's a half-grown man. I mean, it's really just strange to me. It's cute,
right?
But it's just meaningless to me, because we think somehow we reach manhood to some standard. And I would argue the standard is competency in your daily activities, especially around your child rearing activities. I think rearing children is the most important men and women do, and we are really competent at it when we're given the opportunity, and we want to do it. Problem, though, is when our adult relationships falls apart, the kids then become fodder. They become the reason, become a focus of some of the fighting, etc. And it's really not about raising the kids. I'm going to fight to raise my kids. What I'm going to fight for is for you can't raise my kids. And that's really off kilter. That's makes no sense at all. But that is what the system is set up. I would argue that with young couples, there's a lot of conversations that need to take place before they get married, and ideally before they have children. What is child rearing about? What is your role? What is my roles? How do we switch roles? How do I make known to you what I'm interested in from you, and ditto? How do you make known to me? How do we problem solve? When problems come up, how do we take time out and begin to get face-to-face conversations that are focusing on problem solving? Are we thinking about solutions? Are we thinking about what's in best interest for the kids? It's amazing to me how, I honestly hear more women doing this than men, but they're talking about my kids, and they're our kids. But it's amazing to me how, particularly when I'm upset with you, how you don't have any rights anymore. These are my kids. And say, no, that's not life. That is not what it's about. We have to learn to have some conversations. But from my way of thinking, we have those conversations before the marriage or before the pregnancy, so we can understand. If I can imagine myself being with a woman that had that mentality. Unfortunately, after 53 years, I find I don't have that. I'm somebody who's willing to talk, to problem solve, and our relationship is strong, but it's strong in part because we continue to work on it. And we will talk about things that have changed externally that impact internally, and we have to decide how we're going to confront those things. But the idea and the ability to have the conversations is where that all begins. And we don't have that. I think you're absolutely right. We don't have that. When I see people after the fact, they've never learned how to problem solve. They've never put any energy into sharing with one another, listening, what they have to give up. Because in the relationship, there's you, there's me, and there's us. And us gets pushed off. I will emphasize my I, and you'll emphasize your I, but we don't put the energy over. Now we are a team here. We are doing this together. We need to have that conversation too.
Well, and that's the reason why we came up with that active listening, active communication, and conflict resolution, because these are some skills that most people don't have, but especially us as African Americans. We have not practiced that. We have not been taught that. And we won't get the help for the personal development to learn that. I'm not going to go to a workshop. I'm not going to do a training. I'm not going to let somebody else dictate and tell me how to be a man. And then the other thing is, what is manhood? You know, I mean, where do we Who defines us as a man when we were growing up? Who gave us our masculinity?
Well, if we were fortunate enough, it would be our father or another man in the father's role. Could be an uncle, a grandfather, an older cousin, etc. But there was a point in time when males were present, and they were consistently present. And I certainly was fortunate enough, because I do see this as a major issue in my life, that there were men that were present, including my father. So my father taught me how to work, taught me the idea of what work was about how being productive. That also meant growing food. I grew up in rural America, and the idea of being hungry growing up, we didn't have a lot, but I was never hungry growing up, because basically if you put the energy into it, in 4 months ago, you would have the product now, and that you would have enough to get through certain times, because there was always a season to plant, to grow, to do things. So that was a real big skill. I also learned how to maintain a house. So I learned basic things about plumbing. I don't like electric. I got shocked when I was younger, and that was
Bad
one trial learned. Oh man! Yeah. So I'm willing to pay for that or have somebody else to do it. But I can't think of anything else around the household that I can't do. That I mean, I like to do some things, and some stuff I do like. But I learned how to do that. And again, that was my dad, my grandfather, and especially 3 of my uncles that were involved. I thought everybody grew up the way that I grew up. I thought the men in other places were similar to what I was getting. I was in college before I saw that was simply not true, that there were, even at that point in time, there was a system in place that sort of dragged black men down, and things were not available for us. And I think some of this was because I was really okay working with my hands, and my dad taught me there's dignity in any sort of work. You don't have to do certain things to get dignity. Dignity is in you. So I didn't have those hassles. I also, then when I find it was a little bit different, given where I find myself going, the skills that I learned at home were still there. I just modified them to fit the new situation. But as I look back at that, that's what I saw men do. I thought the major thing that a man did was to be able to take care of himself first and foremost, and his family. You can't take care of your family if you can't take care of yourself. We got to go back and recapture our history and begin to use it and celebrate it and make sure folks know, we know who we are and what we're about, because we're sorely missing that.
Yeah, I would agree with you. You grew up in a generation that was very prevalent. I was talking to a friend today, and even I grew up in a time where in your book it talks about the African proverb that it takes a village to raise a child.
Yes, yeah.
And we've lost that.
Yes, we have.
This generation.
Yeah, yes. I would say probably 2 generations.
Yes.
Yeah.
Maybe more, but and so when you say let's have a conversation, when a young man is married, a young African American man that did not have a father, that did not have an uncle, that didn't have a coach, or if he had a coach, the coach was only there for the benefit of himself, to win games, but not to be a mentor, or a person that can speak into that kid's life. And a kid is trying to navigate himself through life without that male role model. You want to talk about that?
Huge problem, because it's at least twofold. Who trains that man to be a man that you raised? And if the models are non-existent or inappropriate, etc., it really is a big issue. And as we were talking earlier, the idea that I proclaim myself to be a man. I'm a full-grown man. Those sort of statements are in many ways kind of a big part of the problem, because, as you pointed out, that we don't have any idea of what manhood is about. We did. We had a very clear idea. But those notions that were in play when I was growing up are not here anymore. And it's not that I don't think they're relevant now, because I think they're keenly relevant, but they're non-existent, etc. I do see some hope with that, because I'm aware of elders stepping to the forefront and being involved here in the Oakland area. I certainly see that there's a very viable, vital organizations in place, but we need much more than that. The idea, I remember I'm much older than you, but it may have worked for you also, but it wasn't just my parents who had the right and responsibility of punishing me.
That's what I'm talking about. Yes, I grew
other
up in that
adults,
generation.
yes, and then let the parents know, but they were given the privilege of participating in rearing. We've lost that. And there's any number of things that speak to us having survived the period of enslavement, which by rights all of us should have died. I mean, it's the things that we went through and survived, and speaks to our truth and who we are in terms of humanity. Some of us got some of that, and then some of us missed that. But we need to go back, and we need to go back quite seriously. And I don't know in my lifetime that I will see it, but I would hope that there's some turns towards that. To go back and ask about the ancestors. Who were they? What were they doing? Who knows what about them? What did I inherit? What is our family known for? But there's the answers to all of that, we just don't know where they are.
Right, and that is a problem that I see very common in our community, is that they do not know their history.
Exactly.
And they don't know, because they have not been taught the value of listening to an elder.
Yes.
Or even if a person volunteers some wisdom, they don't want to hear it.
It's devalued, absolutely.
It's devalued.
Yeah.
So what happens is, because they have that false identity of what a man is, and they've gotten that definition from a person who's not really a man, but it seems like he's a man.
Well, because of a given age or given stature or something, that we get confused with that, and I identify that as something else.
And so when it comes to being involved or engaged with a woman, and you haven't been properly taught how to be engaged with that woman, as far as even just having a conversation. We're not even talking about anything intimate. We're just talking about the conversation of one getting to know the other, and mutually, out of respect. That and this is one of the things I want to go into the next segment, is we know that they know how to do it. Because when they're trying to get that young lady, they know how to have that conversation.
Absolutely.
And they know how to act like they're engaged. Because they have an interest. But
self-serving interest.
Right. That's very good. And so we're gonna close right now.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
So we're gonna come back to Can We Have a Conversation? Again, we have Dr. Michael Connor, and he is an expert in fatherhood and fatherhood practices, and so we're going to glean some wisdom and understanding from him. God bless you.